Hi, Max.
Hi, Luke.
How's it going?
Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Good. I'm pleased that you could join us tonight. So for those who don't know who you are fully, why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. So I'm Maxine Mei-Fung Chung. My debut novel comes out next Thursday with Pushkin, which is called The Eighth Girl, which I've got here. And it's basically crime. So it kind of crosses three genres, and it's about a girl who's living with DID, dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder. And basically it's about her, Alexa Wu. She becomes the unwitting keeper of a nightmarish secret in a trafficking ring. And it's kind of up to her and her best friend, Ella, to try and pull out of the crimes that are occurring and the trafficking of a group of young girls that are involved in a kind of gentleman's club.
Awesome. It is a very good book. I was really lucky to read it last year because it came out in the States last year. So I've already read it, and I can say that it was one of my favorite books of 2020, even though it's not coming out here until 2021. So it can be my favorite book of 2021 as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's start with this. George Orwell wrote an essay called Why I Write, which is a really great essay. If no one has read it, go read it. It's quite interesting. So I find the question itself, the question of the essay, interesting enough. So let me pose that question to you and ask you, why is it that you write?
I guess it's a good question. I don't have any choice not to.
Okay.
And somebody had asked me a couple of weeks ago, had you always wanted to be an author? And really, it wasn't so much that I wanted to be an author, but I wanted to write. And, I think that if you can kind of get up in the morning and there isn't the desire, and there's a book, inside you that you can't help but write, then that's a reason too. So I guess it's really a case of, if I don't write, I'm not happy.
Right.
So it's a case of really no control over it. It's just a desire to write.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think I feel the same way. It's not necessarily writing for a particular result per se, but it's if there's a story worth telling, it's worth telling, even if you're not reaching the masses, even if it's just you writing that story. I think that in itself is worth it. Max, what are your reading influences growing up?
Well, I think like any kind of school kid, I was reading Agatha Christie, Steinbeck, Brontes, the kind of classics.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate actually to have a very good friend who was a librarian, Mrs. Veal. And she kind of was a bit like a kind of literary therapist for me. So, but what I kind of found during my kind of narrow adolescence was that I wasn't particularly connecting with some of the protagonists, who majority of white protagonists. So I asked Mrs. Veal if she could recommend some authors of color. So I guess some of my bigger influences then was Zora Neale Hurston, Walter Mosley, Anne Petrie, the mighty Baldwin. And that was really when my opening started, my love of kind of diverse voices started to ignite. What about you?
My influences growing up were, let me think about this. A big influence was C.S. Lewis. I was quite taken with the Chronicles of Narnia and with his space trilogy books. And I really liked a few of the things like Peter Pan, and I suppose there was a lot of fantasy growing up, less crime and a lot of fantasy. And that even sort of bled into like stuff that I might have watched. But then, started reading kind of crime-centric stuff at a slightly later age. But what's interesting to me is I always had a fascination with stories that had a British location, and often a London location. So it's funny to me in my older years to find myself actually in this place where I read so many stories about growing up. But yeah. What are your current reading influences?
I guess influences change now because maybe I don't necessarily look to authors and books now to influence as much.
Okay.
I probably look to them for entertainment or for escape.
Okay.
So I really love guidance. Sorry?
Would you say you might look to them for like maybe guidance?
Guidance, yeah, for sure, and escape, to connect.
Yeah.
I really loved 3/5 by John Vercher this year. I felt really connected.
Yes.
And so I think that's kind of changed now. And of course, I think when we've written a book, we kind of tend to approach reading in a different way as well.
Yeah.
We're looking at those lines thinking, damn, how did they do that? That is amazing, but I'm looking, I'm reading a lot of poetry now. I read a lot of psychological suspense and thriller.
Right.
It's very wide. I read pretty wide, not just kind of crime and thriller.
What's a recent poem that you've read that has kind of resonated with you?
Yeah. It's got to be by Ocean Vuong, who wrote On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which is really beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Love that. Let's chat about the process of writing.
Okay.
How did you set out to write The Eighth Girl?
Yeah, it's a really good question, isn't it, for us all as writers and readers, because I didn't actually set out to write a crime novel.
Right.
I'm not someone that riffs with thriller beats or kind of architects suspenseful endings or end of chapter hooks. All I knew was that I had a character, Alexa Wu, whom crimes had been committed against, and really that was the only thing I had.
Right.
And so it was very character driven as opposed to plot. I'm absolutely in awe of people that can plot within an inch. So but it's not a way that I can work. It's pretty character driven. It's
interesting. I feel that I hear this from a number of crime writers that when they when they say, I wasn't setting out to write a crime book, and Walter Mosley is one that comes to mind when he talks about the Easy Rawlins books and The Devil in the Blue Dress. He was like, I was just writing a book about LA and my family and my, what the life that I understood. It wasn't writing, it wasn't intentional that he was doing a hard-boiled historical fiction. So I find that fascinating. I think that's a nice way to approach a book. I think sometimes, not always, but sometimes I think it can be really hard when you're thinking, oh, I want to write a crime book, and then you're like, well, how or what? More than I think it's a much better process when it's you find that character and you find that story through the kind of natural, the natural progress. Than saying, oh, I want to write this genre. I think writing character is important, and then that character will lead you into the genre. If your character is suddenly on a spaceship, you're writing science fiction.
I think there's also potential danger in shoehorning narrative into genre, because sometimes we can become overwrought with genre and lose the storytelling.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of it can really get in the way sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I wish we could be a little bit more open-minded about genre, which is why I quite like that in certain bookshops where genre is kind of eradicated. You just have the fiction section, and
I love that
you go through. I think that's some of my I like that the most, because you know, my natural instinct is to go to the crime section. But when I'm you know, not stuck, but when I'm presented with everything, it's you know, it's more interesting. And then I end up picking something up that I probably wouldn't have done if I was just looking in the one section. So how did you manage to write, or how do you manage to write when you're dealing with what you call the nagging child of reality? You know, so you're full-time, you have a full-time job, you have a son that you're raising, you know, dealing with the politics that are around us plus a pandemic. You know, what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. You know, I work full time as a psychoanalyst, so and you know, predominantly working with trauma survivors. So that's been really tough in the pandemic. Obviously, we're all online, so that's an extra additional screen time. You know, and then so yeah, working full time and raising my son, and it was tough. And you know, I wasn't in a fortunate enough position to wait for my muse to arrive. You know, I would get up and get my ass on the seat at 5 a.m. every day and work until I got my son to school, and then in between patients, and then again late at night and weekends. So it was a real act of, you know, complete commitment and dedication.
I suppose during all this time, what did you do to kind of find like a moment of like serenity and peace? Like,
I mean, definitely speaking to other authors, other analysts, and speaking to yourself, and obviously having some playtime, you know, some downtime, because otherwise, you know, I think what writing does is it forces to do deeply unfashionable things, you know, like seclusion and we become introverts, you know, we're kind of in front of this empty screen. So, you know, it's important to have fun and cut loose.
I agree. I think you know, the writer's life is a very introverted life, and that has been, it's so heightened this last year, that it's like I can be quite introverted, but I still like my bursts of social activity. And having almost none of that, you know, able to count on one hand how many times last year I saw, you know, friends and things like that. It's tricky. It's very tricky. So kind of leading on from that, when do you write best?
I probably would say the bookends of the day, so very early morning and very late at night. In the day, I'm just focusing on work, but certainly getting up really early, 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, wow.
5 till 7 is my best time, I find.
Okay. What is it about that early morning start that works so well for you?
I think there's something about the darkness. It's kind of it's cold, it's a little bit depressing. It just helps to kind of get the mood, but you know, there's something about just the peace of that time. So what about you? When do you find you write best?
I think for the most part it's sort of between the hours of 9 and 2, 9 a.m. and 2. Obviously I'm at the moment my full-time thing is doing this PhD, so it's kind of, I'm basically trying to do that 9 to 5, but then that tends to go from more like, you know, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. But the best hours I think are that kind of 9 to 2 time frame.
That sounds really civilized. That sounds really
I try to be structured with the writing. There was a lot of time over the pandemic that time was spent just like staring blankly at the screen and not knowing what to put down.
Yeah.
But then you just kind of find the avenue, and you go down it. Actually, a really good piece of advice, and I mean this is well known, but I was just listening to an interview with Walter Mosley, and he was like, well, I make sure that I write 1,000 words per day. And I'm like, that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking. Okay, I'll try and do that. And then when I kind of work with that frame in mind, then it makes a little bit easier. So onto character and plot. What do you think is more important between those two, character or plot?
Wow. I mean, for me personally, and it's just my opinion, I don't pretend to be any expert on this at all, but for me, it's about character. You know, I fall in love with the character, and I think then the character just shows you the way. You know, plot kind of scares me a little bit. It kind of, and maybe because I'm a shrink as well, you know, the character and getting to know people and the psychology of people, maybe that's just something that I'm more drawn to. Obviously, I know that plot's important for pace, and you know, you get that flabby center in a book, and that has to move, and I have to work really hard at plot where that's concerned, because it doesn't come naturally to me.
What is it about plot that scares you? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we think about thriller beats, or you've got to hit certain beats at certain times, and the peaks and the troughs, sometimes that feels a little controlled for me, and a little limiting, because if our character wants to do something else, but we're told that we've got to keep momentum, that kind of, it kind of bothers me a little bit.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from. What do you think of the idea that character is plot?
Yeah, I kind of like that. That feels right. That feels right for me anyway. That feels comfortable, more comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of time spent on the differences between, you know, character and plot, but your character is made really out of the plot. So I find the two so intrinsically linked that you can't have one without the other. I've known individuals who have tried to write a plotless book, and they have empty characters because there's nothing happening, which is, you know, can be really tricky. But yeah, so I think both of those together are quite important. Right. Have we lost Max? Max, are you there? Max.
She's frozen on my screen.
She's frozen. Max. What do we do? This has never happened before. Do I?
Maybe if she logs out and logs back in again, that will get over the freezing, I think.
Yeah, I think she's gone. So we'll wait for her to log back in. I will. So anyway, guys, how's it going? What's happening? There we go. She's wanting to be admitted again. Hello.
So sorry, it just keep out. I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I was rambling and then realized you were paused, and I was like, I think maybe she's not here.
I'm so sorry, Luke. Carrie, where did we get to before I
was rambling about character and plot, and that I think you can't have one without the other. That's the summary of what I was saying. So eighth girl is very character driven. Would you consider it a character study?
I would say it's kind of part character study, part psychological thriller. That's probably how I would describe it. It's very driven by character, because it's based around, you know, a woman who's living with multiple personalities. So there's a lot of emphasis on character. So yeah, I would probably say it's part character study, part thriller.
Yeah. And with the character study aspects, I mean, that is all. It feels like it's quite taken from your experiences with your psychiatry work, really.
Sure, sure, yeah.
And did you feel that this was, a way of, was this some sort of way of channeling your experiences and understandings of things into this particular character of Alexa?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that of fiction as truth. It's it comforts those of us that are troubled, but it also troubles us if we've gotten too comfortable. And my feeling is that, never get too comfortable. It's a curse.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of really explore the territory of DID.
Yes.
Previously, people living with DID had been portrayed in kind of lunatic tropes.
Yes.
Serial killer tropes. And that certainly wasn't my experience when I was working with people living with multiple personalities.
Yeah.
I really wanted to kind of advocate for those that had been really, in my opinion, misrepresented.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So you would say that was kind of one of your main aims with the character.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That makes sense. Now Alexa has the multiple personality disorder. So I want to discuss the stigmas, which you kind of just briefly touched upon. So how does pop culture handle the portrayal of characters with similar disorders? I think of Fight Club, Psycho, and Split. Some of these portrayals, sometimes lean into almost superhuman aspects, thinking of Split in particular.
Sure. I mean, I've written about this for Crime Reads and how pop culture got it wrong with dissociative identity disorder. And my feeling is that my experience has just been very, very different. In Split, there is the portrayal of this kind of superhuman person that climbs the walls. And, in my experience, that is not happening. It's not that someone with DID is sprouting fangs and growing wings. It's a lot more kind of subtle in many ways. And the other thing that had me irked was that they were being represented as the people that were committing crimes. And what I would say in my experience is that people that are living with the disorder are usually the ones that have been victims to crime and not the ones that commit them.
Right.
That felt very important for me as well, to destigmatize these tropes in terms of, these kind of mass serial killers. It really wasn't how I was experiencing it as a clinician.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We have a question from Jared. He says, can you describe what happens when you're talking to a multiple personality who slips in and out of another character? How do you handle this?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Thanks, Jared. It's very subtle. That this is something that I've tried to portray in Eighth Girl. There's not a kind of switch where, the voice is changed. It's a bit like in Split, when you see all these kind of characterizations of all these wardrobe changes. That really isn't the case. That it can just be something as subtle as a body movement or a language shift or something somatized in the body. So it's very subtle. And as a clinician, what I do is I just speak to the person who's with me.
Right.
And I just take it, very slowly. But again, we're not talking in tongues or talking any differently to one another. We're just talking human to human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very, very good question. I like that. That's fascinating. Let's focus a little bit on genre. Oh, and one quick thing: if anyone else has a question in the audience, just put it in the chat, and we will read it out. So let's talk about genre for a moment. Was The Eighth Girl hard to place?
In the States, no. You were very lucky in the States. We placed it really quickly with William Morrow. In the UK, a little more.
Yeah.
I think maybe because the disorder isn't as widely known in the UK as it is in the States. But I also felt that publishers were a little nervous with the positioning of it. So some of the feedback was that it was kind of too literary,
Right.
And they were not sure whether it was more character study or whether it was more crime. So it kind of crossed genres, if we want to, think that genre feel,
Yeah. So I think a lot of people would tend to default and maybe call it a psychological thriller. But when I was reading, I didn't really get a psychological thriller aspect, but I got more of a psycho suspense aspect.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's more suspense driven rather than the thrills of a Gone Girl sort of situation. So onto that, how does The Eighth Girl, in your opinion, differ from other psychological suspense novels, and maybe some you might in some ways compare it to?
Yeah, I guess I don't know how it's different to necessarily. I guess it's just different because I'm a psychoanalyst, and maybe there's some insight into the kind of, so it's basically split between the psychoanalyst, who's called Daniel, and Alexa. So it takes alternate pacing in terms of the chapters. Which is probably quite similar to Gone Girl in that way, because of the splitting between different narratives, different voices. And of course you've got the other different voices within the multiple personalities of Alexa as well. So I guess the difference is maybe a lot of viewpoints, a lot of voices within the novel, because she has many personalities.
So a little bit onto the publishing side. The Eighth Girl came out, like I said, last year in March 2020, and it's just now reached the UK in March 2021. What was the experience? What's that experience been like, having the book in one country out for a year, and what do you think was the reason it took so long for the UK to catch up and get it out?
I'm really lucky now with a great publisher, Pushkin, who are really interested in the advocation of diverse voices. And they've just set up an imprint, Pushkin Vertigo, which is amazing. And it was just really difficult to place, I think, as well, because if I could be so brave to say, there's not too many Asian protagonists in crime as well. So that was another hurdle to kind of get over. So, not only were we dealing with stigmas in terms of mental illness, but there was also the protagonist who was of Asian descent. Right.
So you think that had a little bit of there was a bit of trouble getting it out because of that?
I don't know whether there was. I don't know whether it was troubling or whether there was trouble because of that. But I think it is a question that I'm interested in such a very large genre. Why there are still so few authors of color in the crime community. And so it was tricky because I wasn't being published in my home country to begin with, although I did feel very much at home with crime writers of color. Kelly Garrett invited me to join Crime Writers of Color with Walter Mosley and Gigi Paden. And so I felt that I was in good company over there whilst we were being published. And now we'll see how she goes when she comes out next Thursday. So
well, I fingers crossed that it goes well. I think it will. It was one of those books where I very rarely read a book in one day. And this was a book that I sat there, I wanted to keep reading. I wanted to find out what happens next. Often I can be like, oh, this is a good story, put it away for a bit. But this was one of the rare ones that I was like, I've got to stick with this. It's got a good hook to it. So what do you think is next then? So The Eighth Girl we know is optioned by Netflix, which is very exciting. So tell us about what's next.
Yeah, so we're working with Aggregate, who is Jason Bateman and Michael Costigan, which is thrilling, which I'm really pleased about. And I'm in conversations with Michael Costigan at the moment, which is, you know, it's really cool. I'm a big fan of American Gangster and Brokeback Mountain and Girl Interrupted. So,
right.
So we're in conversations about that, which is really exciting. And in terms of what next, I've just signed a contract for a piece of non-fiction work.
Nice.
And I'm also working on another novel as well.
Wonderful.
So.
Are you allowed to say anything about the nonfiction? It's okay if you're not. I don't put you on the spot. Yeah. If you are, you know.
Yeah, I'm not yet for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Okay. What about the? It's all right. What about the next fiction book? Do you have any kind of hints at what to expect, or what we can expect? I suppose?
It's a kind of modern take on a Greek classic. So, another kind of transgressive woman as the protagonist that looks at power struggles,
right,
and some lingering shock.
Yeah.
Again, but less kind of psychologically based,
right,
as in a therapist and a client. Yeah. It's so early days on the novel, but the piece of non-fiction's finished. So.
Awesome. When I think about The Eighth Girl as a series or whatnot, if it's being developed if it's on Netflix, I would assume they're going to break it up into a series. You've only written the one book, Netflix like series, as in they want more than one. What do you think? What do you think about, once they finish The Eighth Girl, what does a second story look like, in your opinion? And do you think do you have one of your own for Alexa, or would you just be happy for them to carry on?
Yeah, that's a good question. They have asked me to be involved because of the psychological angle on it, and they were quite interested in getting my take on it. But again, I'm just thrilled that they picked it up, and I guess Alexa could travel. It's based in London. There's nothing to say she can't go to Russia or or the States. Who knows? But we'll see. I think it's looking more like a series than a film. So I think there's a little more scope if there's a series as well. So
So if you had your pick of where you could drop Alexa next, you take her from London, where would you want to see her go?
I think New York.
New York. Why? I'm curious. What is it?
Just because I kind of have an affiliation there, I have family there. I love it. I love the vibe there.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of mischief that she could get up to, and it's just a city that I love. So
yeah. And in terms of the having your book adapted by someone else, there are some authors who are totally against it. I think of someone like Alan Moore, who refuses to watch The Watchmen and never wanted The Watchmen adapted. And then I think of others who, their work has been adapted, but it's quite radically different to what their source material was, and they're just kind of like, whatever. What do you think what are your hopes for the adaptation? Do you want it to be radically different, or do you want it to be quite truthful, or what's the give on that for you?
I think I wouldn't want it to be too different. My hope would be that it wouldn't be too different, because then we may potentially slip into tropes again, and one of the reasons why I wrote Eighth Girl was to really demystify what it was like living with this disorder. So, and I think with DID also, it kind of it adheres to the extreme, so extreme memory loss, extreme trauma. And I think what Hollywood does is it very much kind of fetishizes that angle of mental illness, and I would want to tread very carefully around that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I would hope that that it's kept quite truthful, because I think to what you wrote, because the story that you did is
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, does anyone in the audience have any questions? I can see Nikki says that she says, as a complete coincidence, that she's joining us tonight. She actually won a copy of The Eighth Girl through the publisher this week, and is very much looking forward to reading it. That's very exciting. Yes, does anyone have any questions for Max about the book? The new cover, the UK cover, by the way, is wonderful. I love
really
it.
Happy with it. Yeah, really pleased with it, actually. Yeah, I feel it really kind of sums up the picture, you know, the kind of fragmentation of the personalities. Yeah, I'm really, really happy with it. I think Pushkin have done
Can you hold it up closer?
Sure, Bonnie. Yeah, there we go.
It's very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. It is awesome. Oh wait, Jared says, what is the premise, i.e., what does the blurb say that draws the reader in?
Oh, okay. So it's one woman, many personas, but which one is telling the truth?
Oh. Let's see. Awais says, the novel sounds absolutely amazing. You found a reader in me, so
oh, thank you.
He will be reading it when it comes out. Yeah, any other comments or questions? Bonnie says, me too. Any other comments or questions from the audience? John says, it's amazing.
Oh, thank you, John.
Jared asks, how many murders?
It's interesting. It's really interesting. I had a question from my publishers asked me today, which was, you know, if we kind of really despise violence and struggle in writing about, but why do we write about violence? And, you know, what are the ethical codes around that?
Yeah.
And there isn't actually any murders in The Eighth Girl.
Yet it is very gripping, Jared, I promise you. That is fascinating, though, the idea of you know, we detest crime and all that kind of stuff, but we also find ourselves drawn to writing about it. But I think, you know, part of that is to do with our own sort of attempt to understand the why. You know, why do we do all these things? You know, why does someone kill someone? Why does someone, you know, commit a crime? What is it's all about the psychology, I suppose, of the person who committed it. Really, it's understanding and getting into that frame. And I think, you know, I think that's a kind of an important thing to do. But on the flip side, the great thing about writing about these stories with, you know, protagonists that you know, are heroic in many ways, it also is a really great way of developing empathy in readers.
Yeah.
And I think that's another really important aspect about you know, why we write about these sorts of things. Because in your book, you will have, you know, brought this very interesting character to people who they might not, you know, see on a day-to-day basis, but you're bringing awareness and a much less sort of, you know, pop culture, you know, spin on it, and that's, I think, quite important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of interested in consequences and the notion of consequences when crimes are committed. What happens to the victims that survive crimes, and what happens to those that commit them?
Yeah.
And what are the consequences? So that for me, in terms of Eighth Girl, was very much a premise.
Yeah.
Around that, as well as you say, Luke, empathy and compassion. Yeah.
I that's another thing that fascinates me as well, is what happens kind of what happens after the crime. And I think that's why I'm drawn a lot towards the hard-boiled genre. And I can think of it's Raymond Chandler's Farewell, My Lovely. Such a tragedy, because it's one of those great books where you get to the end, you have this sort of resolution, and a character. I'll try not to spoil it, but I'm going to spoil a little bit, but I'll leave the names out so you don't know who I'm talking about. But one of the characters is shot and killed, and the other person who gets away, and then there's this little short bit afterwards where we find out what happens to them after the person who killed one of these people gets away. They end up also being killed, but in the process, they also end up killing a police officer. And I think what I find, it's the story itself is quite tragic, but also the domino effect of crime it's like, it just keeps going. Is there ever really an end to it? It's very, very tricky. We have a question from Stella. Stella says, why do you think there are so few female crime writers of color? And what do you think the solution is?
I've got a feature coming out in the Sunday Times, not this Sunday, the next Sunday, that addresses this question, which asks, why there are so few women of color authors in the crime genre, but also just generally people of color in the crime genre. And I think Kelly Garrett, who was the founder of Crime Writers of Color, spoke very eloquently about it and said that, there's been some apprehension because there is still the view that we won't sell books. And she very pointedly points out that, as Walter Mosley might say, he convinced us in the 1990s that, even presidents of the United States will read a crime novel about a Black man.
Yeah.
So, I think it's much improved. I think we need to not lose momentum. I think there needs to be more diversity. Publishers need to be getting behind us more.
Yeah.
So I don't know why it is, but I just hope that there is some momentum and some shift in the thinking.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's the answer to the question is quite, it feels complex, and it also seems like an odd question that we have to ask. It feels like a question we shouldn't have to ask.
Sure.
It's a bizarre one. And I, hopefully, as we continue to progress, with society, that we, really, really, start seeing more voices out there. I recommend everyone just watch Star Trek, because I think Star Trek makes it quite nice. It's like, oh, everyone is normal, everyone is one, everyone is you're not, there is no negative view of the other. We are the human race.
I think it's a kind of necessary question, though, and I think it's an important one, because it is very evident with such a huge genre, there are still so few writers of color. So yeah. If
you were to recommend a writer to the audience, who would you recommend?
Sorry, John, I keep talking about you, but it's got to be John Vercher. I mean, I'm in awe of 3/5. It was just totally awesome. That was my book this year. And I really love Steph Charles' Your House Will Pay. And I really enjoyed that. And also Tiffany Sow's The Majesties as well.
Nice.
So yeah, those are the three that I'm looking at the moment. Yeah.
Awesome, wonderful.
Hi, everybody. I'm so thrilled to welcome three wonderful writers who are going to read from their new books. And the first one will be Nadine Matheson. So if you could turn your camera on, Nadine. Nadine has always been passionate about writing and storytelling, born and lives in London. She's a criminal solicitor. I got to hear about that. In 2016, she won the City University Crime Writing Competition. She completed the Creative Writing Crime Thriller Novels Masters at the City University of London with distinction in 2018. So she's a relatively recent grad there. Tammy Hogue, who's one of my favorite thriller writers, said about her novel, "Buckle up, readers. From the first scene, Nadine Matheson takes us on a heart-pounding roller coaster ride. From the aftermath of a grisly crime to the hunt for a mad genius, the Jigsaw Man will take your breath away again and again. In D.I. Henley, Matheson has given us a smart, modern heroine. I hope this is only the first of many adventures for her." So that's Tammy Hogue in the Sunday Times, best-selling author of The Boy. She's a fantastic writer, and if Tammy says this is great, this is great. Anyway, so Nadine's going to read from The Jigsaw Man. Tell us a little bit more about what you're going to read.
Okay, so this is The Jigsaw Man, which was published last Thursday. So it's only a week old. My baby's only a week old. But I'm going to read the prologue, so just the opening of The Jigsaw Man. So I'll start now. 6:44 a.m, Greenwich Pier, low tide, and Maxwell Thomas is walking his dog on the riverbank. He's not expecting to find pieces of a body. He walks on grey clay, wet pebbles, and shards of glass, avoiding scraps of wood and discarded car tyres. As he lets the dog Petra off the lead, he notices the sunlight bouncing off something on the ground. He bends down and pulls at it carefully. Yesterday, he found a medieval pin and a Roman radiate coin. Today, it's nothing more than broken links from a bath plug chain. Disappointed, Maxwell stands up and sees that his dog is sniffing at something in the mud. It's late summer, the heat wave hasn't broken, and the temperature is steadily rising. Maxwell wipes away the beads of sweat from his forehead as he walks. His t-shirt clings to the folds of fat on his stomach. At 6:48 a.m, he reaches the dog and sees what has caught her attention. Jesus fucking Christ. He pulls the dog back by her collar. Adrenaline rushes through his body and his pulse beats in his ears. It's the same feeling he had yesterday when he discovered the Roman radiate coin. Inquisitiveness and excitement, which quickly disappears. Now he is overwhelmed as disgust, fear and nausea sweep over him. His free hand is shaking as he takes out his mobile phone. The phone falls among the wet pebbles. He wipes the screen against his jeans, checks that the camera is clean. He takes a picture of the severed arm. 1 mile away, Heather Rosiski, an archaeology professor, is supervising a group of second-year students as they complete their fieldwork on the site of the old Deptford dockyard. Heather leans against the riverside wall, checks her watch and sighs. It will be another 4 hours before the tide comes in, but she is eager to leave and return to her office. She needs to finish the final draft of her book on the decline of London river excavations before her editor makes good on her promise to kill her. She's missed her deadline twice and has already spent her advance. A scream disturbs the calm air, and Heather sees one of her students, a girl named Shrey, running towards her. The rest of the students are backing away from the moss-covered rocks as Heather runs over to Shrey, who has tripped over a piece of wood and fallen to the ground. "What's wrong?" Heather asks. Shrey shakes her head and begins to cry as Heather pulls her to her feet. The students are talking loudly and all at once as they make their way towards Heather. Someone grabs her arm and pulls her towards the decaying ferry steps. Heather can feel the scream rising in her throat as she looks down into the murky pool of water and sees a headless torso among the black and green jagged pieces of wood. Christian Matai, a kitchen fitter, is walking towards Nelson Mews, the last cul-de-sac on Watergate Street in Deptford. The river is not too far away, and he thinks that he hears the sound of a woman screaming, but is then distracted by someone playing the trumpet, badly. As he approaches number 15, he opens the gate and throws his empty coffee cup towards the skip on the driveway. "Shit," Christian says in his native Albanian, as the cup bounces off the side of the skip and falls to the ground. As he bends to retrieve the cup, something catches his eye. 1/2 metre away, a swarm of flies are dancing around an object on the ground. Coffee mixed with stomach acid is making its way up Christian's throat. His vomit covers the flies that are all over the ragged and decaying flesh of the severed leg. And that was the prologue for The Jigsaw Man. Thank you. So The Jigsaw Man was released. Thank you, Jared. I put a round of applause. Jigsaw Man was released last week.
I like the way more than one person finds the body like a jigsaw. Because normally you just have the cliche scene of, oh, it's a body, scream, and cut to something else. But I like the way the body bits are found all over the place. That's good.
Thank you.
Do more of that.
When I started writing it, I wanted it to be like everyone was finding the body parts at the same time and having that moment. So thank you very much for that.
Excellent. Look at all your wonderful comments in the chat.
Let me open the chat.
I'm loving this, Nadine. This is really wonderful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got the traditional involvement of a dog walker. I live near the Thames, so I'm used to seeing people walking along the riverbanks obviously not looking for body parts, they're normally looking for treasure. So I thought, how exciting it would be to find a body, a leg or an arm on the riverbank.
Well, excellent. Makes everybody want to read it, I think. Yeah. Nadine.
Well, it's available now everywhere. And my social media, I always forget this. I'm all over the place. So you can find me on Twitter, Nadine Matheson, and on Instagram, Queen Nads, and on Nadine Matheson Books on Facebook. So thank you.
Facebook, Nadine Matheson Books?
Yeah, Nadine Matheson Books.
You have a website as well.
Oh, I forget. Yeah, I've got a website as well, NadineMatheson.com.
Oh, excellent. Okay, we'll look for you, Nadine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful read.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next person we have reading this evening is Awais Khan, and he is coming to us from Lahore, Pakistan. Awais, are you here? Can you turn yourself on?
Hi, I'm here.
And Awais is the author of the critically acclaimed bestseller debut, which is his debut in the Company of Strangers. Came out in the summer of last year, published by Simon & Schuster and the Book Guild. He has recently signed a 2-book deal with Orenda Books. Awais has given lectures on creative writing at Durham University, American University in Dubai, Canadian University in Dubai, United States Educational Foundation of Pakistan, Kinnaird College, and a name I can't pronounce, Hajveri Institute.
Yeah, it's fine. You're right. Hajveri, yes.
Hajveri, okay. And he's got another one coming out in August of this year. He is very productive. The next one will be called No Honor. And he studied here in London at creative writing at the Faber Academy in London. He also graduated from university in Canada in Western Ontario. The log line of this book is that Mona has almost everything: money, friends, social status, everything except for freedom. Languishing in her golden cage, she craves a sense of belonging. I'm reading the right one, Awais, right?
Yes, yes,
okay.
You are.
Desperate for emotional release, she turns to a friend who introduces her to a world of glitter, glamour, covert affairs, and drugs. There she meets Ali, a physically and emotionally wounded man years younger than her. Heady with love begins a delicate game of deceit that spirals out of control and threatens to shatter the deceptive facade of conservatism erected by Lahori society and potentially destroy everything that Mona has ever held dear. It's gotten some wonderful quotes. A beautifully observed novel opens a window on a milieu of Pakistani society that is seldom written about. Fierce and compelling, it's a novel to be savored, a debut to cherish. And here to read us a bit from this novel, or No Honor, will you be reading?
No, it's in the Company of Strangers.
Right, so read it from the Company of Strangers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bonnie, for this wonderful introduction. You might not be able to tell, but I'm blushing really hard now, right now. But yeah, I'm going to be reading a little bit from the prologue of In the Company of Strangers because No Honor is still in the editing suite, so I can't really read from that. So this is from the prologue where a young man is out and about the work and is about to do something very strange, to say the least. So he stepped closer, visualizing how the end would be, and a plethora of confusing notions assaulted his mind. How would it feel? Would it hurt? Would he feel the head slicing off his body and rolling across the floor? Would he even feel a hint of the savage triumph he had been promised? The voice of the reader rang in his head again like a drumbeat. It will be painless for you, Jihadi, but the pain of those kafirs, those non-believers, will be unimaginable. Remember, they are not humans. They don't feel, they don't love. You shall be rewarded for this noble deed, my boy. You will go to heaven. Kill those kafirs. Kill those kafirs. He recited it like a mantra in an attempt to ward off other, more disturbing thoughts. The cocoon of indifference he had created around himself threatened to burst and reveal something ugly, something forbidden, something that smelled like fear. He felt an urgent need to tear away the shawl and fling the jacket into the rubbish, leaving the button intact and the world unchanged. Was this what going to heaven was like, through so much pain, through such cruelty? Did he have to stoop as low as those Goras to exact revenge? Coward. These are the workings of Shaitan, the Satan. Their leader had warned him about this. Shaitan will tempt him, try to deter him from the virtuous path to that of sin and cowardice. He must fight this. He trudged towards the ancient gate, the breeze drying beads of sweat that had erupted across his forehead. His hand slipped inside the shawl. Kill those kafirs. An ice cream van approached. The gate to a house on his left opened. A woman emerged, carrying a small child in her arms, as the ice cream van blared the familiar tune that heralded happiness, lighting up the faces of children everywhere. He paused, waiting for the child to receive his ice cream. He thought the child deserved that much. Ismail watched him as he slurped it down, resting his head on the woman's shoulder. Possibly her son, he thought. Not so long ago, he had done the same, rested his head on his mother's shoulder as his father came back from a hard day's work, smelling of sunshine and well-earned sweat. Not so long ago, he had been innocent too, oblivious to everything happening around him, running alongside the ditches with his siblings, relishing the potent possibility of falling into the black muck. So filthy and yet so exciting. Until they'd bombed his village, killed his entire family while he brought back fried fish for dinner. Everything lost in a second. He remembered the polythene bag speckled with condensation, falling to the floor with a wet smack. The crusted fish sliding out on the floor. Slicked with congealing blood, the floor wore the red color of shame, the shame of being branded terrorists in their own land. Steam issued from his family's still warm bodies, dissolving in the cold air. The head of his infant brother lay in the ditch, his eyes wide open in fear of question he couldn't tell. That was it. He couldn't take it anymore. He flicked open the plastic casing that protected the button and closed his eyes as his thumb punched it hard. Thank you. So this is from In the Company of Strangers.
Thank you very much. That's very nice. Yep, I want to read it.
Yeah, so this is the South Asian edition. So the one that you will find in the UK is orange. So that's the orange edition.
Okay. So they have different covers. Isn't it interesting how they put different covers in the different countries?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's really amazing how they get their territory right, because they sort of ran a survey and everyone in South Asia said they love the blue one and everyone in the UK said they love the orange one. So they appear to know their markets. Yeah.
So you're getting some wonderful comments in the chat section here.
I'm just going to open that.
Jared has a question for you. Did you find it easier to get this published in your country or this one?
Jared, to be honest, it was hard everywhere because being a Pakistani, we don't have a proper publishing industry here. So we don't have any agents in Pakistan. So either you get an agent in India or you get an agent in the UK. So for my UK agent arranged everything. So, yeah, and the funny thing is that both deals happened within 3 days of each other. So I don't know.
Waiting for a bus. Several come along at once after about 3 hours.
Yeah. So it literally happened all at the same time.
Yeah. Excellent. Sue Brown says, great read. Nikki says, Nikki's iPhone says, sounds like another great read.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. Means a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for reading.
And if you want to follow me on in social media, I'm Awais Khan author on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. So it's very easy to. I'll write it down for you guys in the chat.
Actually, yes. Could each of you put your contact information into the chat? That would be lovely. Maxine and also Nadine, if you could do that as well. And John, when you're available to do that. Our third reader tonight is John Vercher. He is the author of 3/5, which came out last September from Polis Agora Books, and in October it came out in October from Pushkin Vertigo. 3/5 was chosen as the launch title for Agora and has received praise from Kirkus and starred reviews from the Library Journal and Book List. The novel was named one of the best books of 2019 by the Chicago Tribune. John Vercher is a writer currently living in the Philadelphia area with his wife and 2 sons. He has a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Pittsburgh and an MFA in creative writing from the Mountain View Master of Fine Arts program. Kirkus Reviews says of his book, a sad, swift tale bearing rueful observations about color and class, as urgent now as 24 years ago. And The Spectator, here in London, says 3/5 is a seriously impressive and timely debut, and I'm excited to see what Vercher does next. And this is one of my favorite quotes: if a book can be both difficult to read and impossible to put down, it's this book. You should read books that challenge you. This is such a book. Matt Coleman said that in Book Riot. So John is going to read to us today. Take it away, John.
I'm actually going to call a little bit of an audible and not read from that book, although I did want to show that Pushkin does really do amazing covers, as Maxine said. So this is the cover for 3/5. But I wanted to read from the beginning of my next book that comes out in 2022. It's called After the Lights Go Out. It's also going to be coming out with Pushkin as well. So, you know, like a stand-up comedian on the road, I thought I'd try out new material here and see how it goes. So bear with me. It's still in the editing phases, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Just to give a little background, the title of the novel is After the Lights Go Out. It is about a mixed martial arts fighter who is losing his battle with pugilistic dementia. And as he's doing this, he's also caring for his father with Alzheimer's. And he's discovering that in the late stages of his father's Alzheimer's, that he may in fact have been a racist. So there's a lot of complex dynamics going on. And so I've teed it up. Here we go. A year ago, it was the groceries. Today, it was the dog. A year ago, he'd gotten the call. A #1 contender fight. After alternating wins and losses, he'd strung together 4 in a row, evading a cut from the roster by the slimmest of margins. The old-timer, the journeyman, not a has-been, but a never was. In spite of, no, because of the doubters and their calls to leave the gloves in the middle of the cage, no one would have thought less of him if he'd quit on his own terms. The game had passed Xavier Scarecrow Wallace by. Too many young bucks on the come up looking for a stepping stone to that next level. The cage had no place for old toothless lions fighting for their pride. And then 4 in a row. No tomato cans either. Championship kickboxers, jiu-jitsu aces, each one the next big thing. But none of them had the grind in them. All talent and hormones, but cardio made cowards of them all. Xavier dragged them into deep waters, the championship rounds where lactic acid torched muscles, where deep breaths provided no oxygen, only the desperate need to breathe deeper, faster. Shoulders ached, submissions lacked squeeze, punches lost their snap, kicks sloppy, thrown with languid legs, hinging and pivoting at the joints from sheer momentum. Break the spirit and the body follows fast behind. But he'd paid a cost for his time in the deep end too. Worse than the patchwork remnants of stitches in his forehead, worse than the accumulation of crackling scar tissue above his jagged orbital bones, worse even than the seemingly interminable, intensifying headaches. Worse than all of that was the forgetting. Patches of time, sketches of memory swiped from a chalkboard where only the faintest outline of the words and images remained. More and more often, feeling that he'd been somewhere, done something, though never sure how, when, or if. The ravages of age, he told himself, nothing more. Some days he almost believed that. When the call came, he'd been ready. The weight didn't come off as easy as it had a decade ago, so he kept his diet tight. Temptation beckoned when the refrigerator was bare, so it was off to the grocery store for the usual suspects. Packs of skinless chicken breasts, sacks of brown rice, sweet potatoes, leafy greens, broccoli, gallons of distilled water. He tossed his plastic sacks of calorie-bereft blandness into the trunk and drove to the gym to tell Shop the news before heading home. That night he was restless. He conjured images of the fight to come. No matter how many times he'd ascended the stairs to the cage, his fearful mental rehearsal was always the same, involuntary and unwelcome. And never was more at stake than now. A contender's bout meant media days, press conferences, local television appearances. He played those out as well. The questions about his age and how many more wars he had left in the tank. His thoughts on his opponent, attempts to spark the inevitable trash talk. He lay flat on his back in the darkness, eyes wide open. A hot breeze wafted through his open bedroom window, sweat beaded on his bare chest. The broken window unit sat like a headstone in tribute to its own demise. Even in the dead of night, the humidity of a late Philadelphia August hung in the air like a fog, pressing up against the wood siding of his father's Montgomery County bungalow. No, stop there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Yay, very nicely done. So you've got some wonderful comments again on the side there. So you have a question. Paul wants to know if you have martial arts experience yourself.
I do, yeah. I fought as an amateur kickboxer and once in the cage as a mixed martial artist about 10 plus years ago now. So, but I've been a lifelong martial artist, all different disciplines.
Can I ask you something? How does the mental practice of martial arts affect your writing?
The discipline helps. If I didn't have it, I don't know if I'd ever get anything done. But it's certainly, it helps to reconcile the imposter syndrome sometimes, because especially when you're competing, imposter syndrome rears its head pretty viciously. So those parallels are kind of helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've probably all felt that. Every writer I know has. So another question someone has for you is 3/5 of what? Let's Jared asked that.
Well, so yeah, I get a lot of people asking if that's a reference to alcohol, which it's not, even though there's a reference to it in that way in the book. But it's in reference to the 3/5 compromise, which was stated that Blacks were only 3/5 human and therefore had no right to property or to vote. And so because the book is very much about race and defining oneself by race, it felt like a very appropriate title for the book.
Excellent. Very interesting. All right. Thank you. This was a wonderful read.